do you think of my hair?
Incredible. I don't know what you've done in the past 2 weeks. We took a week off because we were busy, but it looks fantastic.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I was actually inspired by this movie that we watched today. When Pony Boy is hiding out, he redoes his hair, and I thought to myself, yes, I could redo my hair. So I
Yes,
did.
exactly. Oh, that's such a good scene in the movie. I can't wait to talk about that. Let's talk about which side of town we grew up on. Were you like a soch or were you an outsider? Did you have like those kinds of cliques where you grew up?
There were definitely clicks. I was in between clicks. I was like in the cracks. Like just I didn't have a clique. I didn't have a lot of friends, and for whatever reason, I think part of it was because I was a nerd, big glasses and like the whole thing, and part of it I think I was a little, socially awkward. So I had a couple of buddies, but like we weren't part of like a clique per se. I guess we were part of the nerd clique. I guess that, but that's not like a unified group of people like the soshes. It's just like the
Yeah.
others. You know what I mean? I wasn't part of the tough kids who chewed chewing tobacco and spat it in the, drinking fountains. I didn't go to school dances and that sort of thing, so I wasn't one of those.
You didn't go to any school dances in high school?
Not till I was like a junior, I guess.
Okay.
I had transferred schools too, so in that school I had more of a clique. I was like in the athletes clique, sort of.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I think in the 80s when we grew up, it wasn't really so much socioeconomic, although it was because being preppy in the 80s was huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And driving nice cars, just like any 80s teen movie would tell you. But it was definitely athletes, academic nerds,
Theater
the
kids.
dirt bags who smoked outside,
Mm-hmm.
the theater kids. Then there was the band kids in addition to that.
Who is my understanding are like the most sexually adventurous kids too, by the way.
One time. Yeah.
That's like based in reality, I'm telling
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I moved in 8th grade, in the fall of 8th grade, and then I moved again between my freshman year in high school and sophomore year. So I fell to so many different groups of kids in those years. It was crazy. And I also moved from a big city in Massachusetts that was kind of rough, Lowell, Massachusetts, to one of the wealthiest towns in Massachusetts in 8th grade, very wealthy. And so I was definitely an outsider in 8th grade, and it killed me. It was very bad. I could not adjust, sat by myself at lunch. Like people would actually like point it out and be like, "Oh, you're from Lowell." And these kids had so much money. They all brought their skis to school and they went skiing after school. And they had an allowance where they would take the train into Boston to buy clothing in Harvard Square or whatever. And these kids back in 1987, 1988 were spending, they would get $150 a month for a clothing allowance, which was a lot of money now to give your kid for a clothing allowance. This is 1987. So I was in this totally new world and just didn't know what to do with myself. And then we moved after I was a freshman in high school. But just in those couple of years, I kind of roamed from group to group. Like I went and I hung out with the kids who partied. Like when they were 14, they went to drinking parties. And then I hung out with kind of the nerdy kids and I was sort of just looking for my people and I never found them and we moved.
And then
And
you
then
became an adult.
yeah, I mean, I was a sophomore in high school, and my friends, who I'm still best friends with now, they were athletic and academic, and didn't they were kind of friends with everyone. We didn't
Mhm.
really,
It's the way
you
to
know,
be. And
yeah,
those are like the unicorn kids.
yes,
They're mature enough to recognize that all that high school stuff is baloney
yeah.
and just be friends with the nice people who are make you laugh. You know what I mean?
And people always comment because they'll see us together because we do like a yearly trip. You guys are the only ones who really all hang out together still. I'm like, yeah, because we actually liked each other.
Yeah, right. How many of those friends you had in like, especially when I got to the second high school I went to, Portland Lutheran High School, like I'm in contact with two of those guys anymore, and like I realized I don't like those people. Like, we hung out
Yeah,
because we were there, and we had sports in common. But
exactly, exactly.
um, did you ever get any like were there rumbles?
I never I never got into any fights. I fought a girl who I was friends with for a long time in 6th grade, and that ended our friendship, and we never talked to each other again.
Like you laid hands.
Kind of. So she was sort of a rich kid, or at least I thought she was at the time. Now I realize she wasn't really rich. She lived in a duplex, and the house was owned by her grandmother, and her parents lived on one side with her and her brother, and the grandmother lived on the other side. But it was the nicest street in town, and I kind of lived in a crappy apartment, and I was poor. And she was friends with me anyway. And that was kind of a big deal in the early 80s. And she would come to my house, and I felt insecure about it. And I would go to her house and be impressed. And she said something to me during recess in 6th grade about my neighborhood and the kids that lived near me. And I got super like outsiders defensive about like where I grew up. And she said something so dumb. It was like, oh, at least in my neighborhood, they don't like throw toilet paper in the trees or something stupid. Like that didn't even happen. It was just her way of insulting me for being poor. And we took it to the bathroom, and there was hair pulling and pushing, and that's it. That's as far as the fight got.
So you were a greaser.
I mean, she was hitting me too. She was pushing
yeah, I know.
me
Like
too.
when the soshes and the greases.
Oh, I was 1,000% the greaser.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just felt this rage boil up inside of me when she was just being a wicked bad snob. And I was just like, I am not going to take this. Do not talk shit about Hank Street. I will mess you up. Welcome to Film Swap, the podcast where we challenge each other to watch the movies that we've let slip through the cracks or purposely shoved into the cracks for whatever reasons. I'm Angelica Thornton.
And I'm Nick Voll, and today we're talking about The Outsiders.
I bet they're looking for us.
This is our territory. I wish that you could concentrate on something else just once in a while.
What's your name?
Pony Boy Curtis.
These are greasers who tried to pick up on our women.
Must be someplace. That grazers, soshes, must be someplace with plain ordinary people.
You be careful.
Ain't gonna hurt you no more.
Stay gold, Pony Boy.
The Outsiders is a 1983 film directed by Francis Ford Coppola based on the novel by S.E. Hinton. It's about a teen gang in rural Oklahoma in 1965, the Greasers. They are perpetually at odds with a rival group, the Socials. When Greasers, Pony Boy and Johnny get into a fight that ends with the death of a social member, the boys are forced to go into hiding. Soon, Pony Boy and Johnny, along with Dallas and their other greaser buddies, must contend with the consequences of their violent lives. Some greasers try to achieve redemption. Others meet tragic ends. Okay, this stars so many big names who were just, up and comers at the time. C. Thomas Howell, Rob Lowe. This was his feature film debut. Emilio Estevez, Matt Dillon, who I think was the only one who was known at the time. Mm-hmm. Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, Ralph Macchio, Diane Lane. This sparked the Brat Pack genre in the 1980s. I saw this in the theater. I think I was 9 or 10, and I just remember loving it and being so sad. Why didn't you see it?
Well, I was 5 when it came out, so I definitely would not have seen it in the theater. I'm not nearly as old as you. I like to point that out. No. Yeah, I wouldn't have seen it in the theater. Obviously, I was 5. And then, it's not the kind of movie my parents would have rented as a kid. And so
I shouldn't have been watching it in the theater, by the way, because I was only 9 or 10, but whatever. It was 1983. No one cared back then.
Well, you were a greaser, as we pointed out earlier.
I was a
wasn't
greaser.
around, and like
a greaser. Latchkey kid of the 80s. Yeah.
No, I hadn't seen it because it's just before my time, and I had never caught it on cable or whatever. And then it just kind of became one of those movies where you kind of knew about, and you feel like you've seen it, so you don't have to see it, even though I hadn't seen it. You know what I mean? You feel like you know what it's about, and it just kind of fell through the cracks, I guess.
Okay. Well,
Like these kids.
yeah, they did. What did you think?
I liked it. I think it is very much a weirdly directed movie. I mean, Coppola has made 3 classic movies and then a bunch of stuff that I don't like as much. He made my 2 favorite movies in the entire world, Godfather 2 and then The Godfather. That's my order. Apocalypse Now is a bizarre movie, but it's very well made. And then like I just felt like the movie had so many interesting things and great performances, but the direction was so like old fashioned and ham
Yeah.
fisted. Even though he was trying, I think, for some sort of realism, it just the whole thing felt a little after school, especially. I
Yeah.
think the music was a problem, and I read a little bit about the music. His dad was the composer, and his dad made this big score that he didn't like, and he waited till his dad died to remove some of that from like subsequent releases. I don't think, it just felt like there was 2 different movies going on here, like a
Absolutely.
gritty real life thing that we can all relate to. And then there was also this weird sort of sickly Hollywood thing.
I'm glad you mentioned the movie, and I think that, I'm glad you mentioned the music because I think that is what made it seem like an after school special. I mean, it was that cheesy 80s kind of, and then it would be up too loud and fade in and out at the wrong times. I read something in a review that resonated with me. I was thinking when I was watching it, wow, this feels like a soundstage or a play. And this is from Roger Ebert in 1983. And he says Coppola seems to be struggling with some sort of fixation on the contrived Hollywood soundstage look of the 1950s. There are scenes in which he poses his 2 heroes against a lurid sunset and bathes them in backlights so improbably reddish orange that the kids look like Gordon McRae in Oklahoma. And that's what was so distracting to me about the film. It was just like, this doesn't seem real. And it seemed like he was, I don't know, Francis Ford Coppola was trying to be nostalgic or something. It was just a little off in the directing.
Yeah, because the emotions the kids are acting out and feeling seem totally real. I mean, we've all sort of been there when we were kids, just feeling these things. I mean, obviously not to this extreme with the gang fights and all that sort of thing, but it's like these really sensitive performances, I thought, uh, against sort of a cheesy,
Yeah.
stylistic choice pattern.
There are obviously some great things about this film and the book. There are timeless themes here. The reason this novel is taught in middle school, my son just had to read it. He's in 7th grade. They're watching the movie this week, I think.
Oh, wow.
And they have to do a bunch of reports on it. And it's really popular for 7th and 8th grade classes because, it was written by a 16-year-old girl, S.E. Hinton. She wrote it when she was 16. Teenage kids, young teens can really relate to it. This was one of the first novels written about young adults by a young adult for young adult readers. And it feels, I think, immature because of that. So it's relatable. You've got social class, you've got stereotypes, the struggle to find your place in the world, what we have in common, why we're not so different after all. It's tough to be a teenager, of course. But having said that, I'm really surprised by how much I didn't like it this time around. And I have not watched it in forever. I mean, it may be more than 30 years since I've seen this. And I just could not believe how cheesy and cliche and melodramatic it is.
Yeah, and I think that's the main impediment to me enjoying it fully. I think that I did enjoy it ultimately because, again, I think there are so many things that are relatable about the movie, and I think there is an emotional core that's true. And I can see the value of this, right? But stylistically, it just took me totally out of the movie at times.
Yeah. I read a review and it said It said this overwrought, stylized teen melodrama might only hold your interest if you were young enough to be impressed by it in 1983, which I do think is true. I was impressed by it in 1983, but yeah, I have some things to say. Like the acting. Okay, Patrick Swayze, I think, is a great actor in this, and Emilio Estevez had some good scenes, and they're not very prominent, right? So we don't get to see. I mean, Patrick Swayze. There weren't even that many scenes, and I wanted to see more of him.
And I think that was his first movie, also.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was his first one. The weakest performances are like Ralph Macchio and C. Thomas Howell.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think C. Thomas Howell. It's hard because some of his dialogue is
The material was not
and corny.
good. Yeah.
I think that he sold it with his face really well. Like, he has big soulful eyes.
Yeah.
And he seemed almost like a blank avatar, which isn't the worst thing because you're sort of supposed to see yourself in him a little bit.
Yeah.
Ralph Macchio was given more to work with, but he's not a great actor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. The people we see the most had the hardest time for sure. But I mean, look at their careers after this. They're the least accomplished in this cast.
Yeah. And I guess Ralph Macchio took this really seriously, which he should have, and was trying so hard. And I knew that. So I'm thinking as I'm watching it again, oh, maybe he's trying too hard. He just, like, what was his accent?
Well, yeah, he's supposed to be from Oklahoma, but he's very clearly a kid from New York.
Yeah.
Or New Jersey.
I just can't believe they let that go like that. I don't know. I have so many questions after seeing this again.
Well, ask him. Let's answer him.
Okay, so where do I start? Daryl. They're talking about Daryl and how he could have been a soch. And then they don't really get into it. I haven't read the book, so I don't know the answer. Is it because he was a football star and he was friends with a football player?
That's my
Can
guess,
that change your socioeconomic status in life in the 1960s? Maybe if you become a football star,
especially in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
like Texas, Oklahoma. I mean, right? I've read also that this movie was originally almost 3 hours long, and the studio made him chop a ton out, which I think was a good call. But I'm wondering if some of those questions might get answered then.
Yeah, and I think he put 22 more minutes back in, right? Several years back. He made like an extended version. My other question, why were those kids hanging out in that abandoned church? And why weren't they being supervised by the adults who were standing outside the church when it was burning?
Oh, you're talking about the fire?
Yeah.
That was a school, I believe.
It was the same place where they were living when they took off after he stabbed Bob to death. They were living in that abandoned church, and the kids were in the same church.
I didn't realize it was the same building. To be honest with you, I thought it was
an abandoned church, and you could see in some of the shots some of the stuff that Ponyboy and Johnny left behind from when they were there, like the bench that they were sleeping on. That makes no sense, which is why they were driving back up to it when they saw the fire.
I thought they were driving up to the church they were staying in, and they just drove past the fire and stopped.
No, this is the church. Isn't that bizarre?
It's very weird. Like, why would the teachers take the kids to the abandoned church to play or whatever they were doing there?
That's the main question. I'm looking it up right now.
So, I mean, yeah, you're talking about a book being written by a 16-year-old girl. So, you know.
Yeah, it's the same burning. It's the church that they were living in. And I never picked that up the first time. I didn't care because I was a dumb 9-year-old. And I'm like, wait a minute, what the hell is going on? And why aren't those adults going in to save them?
Because they're cowards.
Yeah, they're cowards.
They don't have the bravery of.
They're soshes, and soshes are cowards, apparently.
Yeah. And Johnny gets burned really badly. In that.
And he gets paralyzed. Like, I think he breaks his back and he's paralyzed from the waist down.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, they don't really explain exactly. We just know he's in a bad way. I just feel like that reminds me of how episodic this movie feels. You know, really well-written movies to me feel like one linear whole, and this felt like a series of things that happened. You know, it's like a child telling a story. Like, I went to the store and then I saw this happen, and then later I did this happen, this happened. You know what I mean? It's like you're not telling it as a linear plot. You're telling it as a series of things that happens. Does
Which
that
is
make
how
sense?
a 16-year-old girl would tell this story, perhaps. But you would think when they'd adapt it as a screenplay, they would have worked out some of the, the wonkiness of the script. I mean, it was very clear this was a kid's story, right? Look at what Ponyboy and Johnny do when they run away after he stabs someone to death. They're joking around about having to disguise themselves and dye his hair. And then they give each other what looks like the most painful two haircuts I've ever seen. Like, how did they even cut their hair with a knife? But they did a great job considering that's all they had to. Was that the murder weapon?
Yeah, I believe it was. Yeah.
So they gave each other haircuts with the murder weapon. Then they're reading Gone with the Wind, which I don't know, maybe in 1965, kids who are 14 and 16, maybe they were into Gone with the Wind. It seemed weird to me. Then they're talking about sunsets and poetry, and I'm okay with that. I like how they're close enough, they're friends that are close enough to be able to open up to each other. But I feel like in those scenes when they were on the run, there was this missed opportunity to show that vulnerability of that age. They're both coming from really kind of screwed up, family lives. One lost his parents. The other one essentially doesn't have parents. And they could have tapped into what we saw more in Stand By Me, with those kids who are going through some shit and they're leaning on each other and crying, but they're trying to be boys and they're trying to be tough, but it breaks through. And it's beautiful in that movie, in Stand By Me. It's real. But here it just seemed contrived.
Yeah. And again, I think that gets back to, I know for a fact that there are many more scenes in the movie at that church between those boys developing that were cut. So I wonder how much of it would have done some of what you're looking for. But I think you're absolutely right. It's almost the whole point of the movie is that, like, we're all people and we put on these big tough fronts, but we all, have needs. We all want love, etc. And they had the opportunity to demonstrate that there by having these kids show that they're still kids. They can present as tough bad boys or whatever, but that's not really it.
They tried to do it too when Johnny ran home and his parents were fighting. And so they went out to that field and they were trying to sleep and they were cold and they were opening up to each other. But again, it just didn't work. And I don't know if it was the dialogue or the acting, because Ralph Macchio is a little bit he's not great in this. It just didn't work. And I feel like, God, had it been massaged just a little bit more, it could have been spectacular, and they just missed it.
Mm-hmm. A different director might have gotten more naturalistic and better performances out of it. And you've heard the backstory of how this movie got made. So a class of students, middle schoolers in California, wrote a letter to Francis Ford Coppola asking him to read this book and make a movie, and then he did. And it's kind of amazing. I wish they had written to like a different director.
It's true. Yeah, didn't they signed a petition and sent it, not thinking that anyone would take it seriously, which is crazy. I mean, that story alone is insane. Imagine having been one of these kids in this class, like, oh, they made The Outsiders because my teacher one day came up with this idea and we all plotted.
All signed a card.
Yeah, that's crazy. So Val Kilmer was originally approached to play Ponyboy, but he turned it down because he was prepping a Broadway play, Slab Boys. So I can't imagine him in that role. I just always have old Val Kilmer in my head. That's why.
No, I could totally picture him in that role. I think he's got like that brooding sensitivity. He probably would have been better, frankly. I don't know. I think he is great at expressing vulnerability, Val Kilmer. It's funny. I just actually rewatched Top Gun 2 nights ago. I hadn't seen it since probably 1995. And like Val Kilmer's definitely the best part of that movie.
Yeah.
And even in his cockiness, you can see sort of the vulnerability and the wheels spinning in his head in a good way. So I think he would have been able to pull it off. Top Gun wasn't very good, by the way. FYI.
The original?
Yeah, no good.
You
Good Maverick's way better.
Oh, yeah, I agree. There's no comparison. I love the fact that Tom Cruise apparently fought to have Val Kilmer in Maverick, though, and that story is great to me.
Mm.
And I don't know if it's just because I know, so much of Val Kilmer's life story and the tragedy of his voice and, how much he loves acting and everything. I don't know if that's why I love that character so much in Maverick, but I thought that was such a great choice. And even if it was just for the fans, which, I'm sure Tom Cruise did a lot of things just for the fans, I thought it was brilliant.
And speaking of Tom Cruise, he's here in this movie almost.
He's frightening in this movie. He's got those teeth and he's sort of rabid and he's got chocolate on his face. And I thought, who would have thought at the time that he would probably be the biggest star to come out of this thing?
All right.
I mean, he was like a little psycho.
He's the biggest movie star in the world. He has been for 30 years.
Right.
And who would have thought seeing this movie that women would swoon and people would pay so much money to see him in these movies. It's amazing to me. I mean, imagine if he hadn't got his teeth fixed. Never would have happened for him.
Those were his original teeth, because I know his original teeth were kind of messed up, but I was wondering if they messed him up even more because they were frightening.
No, he has bad teeth originally. I saw something once where he had one of them removed. So if you look closely, he's missing a tooth in here and they took one out. And so he's got 3 teeth where there should be 4.
Yes.
And that might even be old because he's probably had even that fixed since.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But I mean, you see this is petty stuff we're talking about here, but you see the intensity even in this character that he'd bring to his whole career. Because I think he's a fantastic actor. And, my personal squabbles with his personal beliefs aside, he's just magnetic on screen. And even here, you just are watching him while he's doing chocolate on his face routine.
I mean, he's in the living room just eating a piece of chocolate and he steals the scene because of his energy. You're absolutely right. And oh, Rob Lowe, you're so beautiful. You always were. I mean, back then he was too pretty. Now it's still almost too attractive, but it's just funny watching him and watching Patrick Swayze. Oh, I'm going to start sweating thinking about him in this role. How old is he supposed to be before we get into it?
High schoolers, at least. I mean, he's not an adult. None of these people.
God.
Wow. Even Swayze's probably just graduated, right? Something like that.
Yeah, that's crazy that this was his first movie too, because he was pretty good in it, I thought. Yeah. Maybe I was just mesmerized by his tank top and his arms and
he's got a presence and you can see in the movie they all defer to him because he's the oldest kid, right? He's derriere. But it comes across on screen. You understand why they stop and whatever he says goes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I love Matt Dillon's character, Dally. He was the most tragic, obviously, the most screwed up, all over the place. I have questions about how old he was and wait, is he running a speakeasy? Is this his house? Is he running an illegal bar when they go to get money from him, or is he staying somewhere?
I want to know the implication that was his parent. That's his house, but that's his parents' house.
That's how his parents live.
Yeah, they just live above the bar.
Wow. Okay.
That's kind of what that was my takeaway from it. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that would obviously be a terrible.
That's situation. Why he seems like he's 40 years old and he's lived.
And I will say too, when the movie started and he's doing his creeper awful routine with the girls, I'm like, I hope this isn't 90 minutes of this, because I really didn't want to have any more time around him because he was such an obnoxious character. So I was glad when the movie pivoted to Pony Boy and Johnny, and away from Matt Dillon's character.
But I'm glad they did that, because otherwise all the greasers are just basically Fonzie. I mean, they're not really doing anything bad the rest of the movie. I feel like Dally's the only one who seems like he's already a hardened criminal. The rest of them seem pretty innocent.
That's true. Because again, they're just kids, and all of that's what's so weird about all this. And it's not that it's not true, because it's clearly that.
Yeah.
But all of these divisions, all these problems start from just nothing. Just you wear your hair differently than me.
Yeah.
That's it.
And that scene at the drive-in, where he's, I will say threatening. I don't think that's too strong a word. Diane Lane's character, Cherry, was very real, because any woman on earth will tell you they've been in that situation where they felt threatened, but they're trying to be nice because they don't want it to escalate. and there's a bully, and there might be a friend who's trying to get the bully to back down. It was a really good scene because I think they captured that perfectly. It was very realistic. I thought, oh, I'm uncomfortable because I've been there.
Yeah, and it makes sense. A 16-year-old girl would have written that because I'm sure she.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I was amazed. Like Diane Lane, just it's crazy to me. You know, I don't know the people who are in this movie who had such great careers after this. She barely even looks like what I visualize her as now.
Well, she's such an interesting actress because she was in this and she was in some other stuff and then like seemed to disappear forever and then came back as an older actress. So I think we all have that older Diane Lane in our head because that's when she became a prominent actress, right? I mean, she was in what's that movie about the fishing boat that capsized off Gloucester in New England? It wasn't The Perfect Storm.
Yeah.
She was youngish in that. I mean, she was probably in her late 20s, early 30s. I have no idea. But that wasn't a great movie. And then she was in a bunch of other stuff that were, she was critically acclaimed for. So
Under the Tuscan Sun.
Oh yeah.
I like that movie.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it's good.
No.
You
put it on the list. Put it on the list. So yeah, it was weird. It's just that's the great thing about watching this as a middle-aged person who is relatively close to the age of all these stars. It's like, even if this is cheesy, even if this feels contrived, they don't really go very deep. I love looking back at these actors and seeing them when they were nothings, no names.
Just trying to scrape, and some amazing cameos, or not really cameos because at the time they weren't famous, but Sofia Coppola is in the movie.
That's right.
A little girl who comes up and asks for a quarter or whatever. And she's very clearly a Sofia Coppola. You can tell it's her. And she plays it with the same chops we'd later see in Godfather 3 that were so wild. And not that it's her fault. I mean, she's a great director. But Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers is in this movie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's one of the greasers. He's an extra.
Wow.
He was one of the gang members, actually. I don't remember if he was a greaser or a soch, but he was in it. Melanie Griffith apparently was in it briefly. In an extra type role. S.E. Hinton played the nurse. The author of the book played the nurse for Dally. Heather Langenkamp, who would be in the go on to be in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, was in this. Tom Waits had a really brief appearance.
All of the cast members in The Godfather had a great career, right? In the 70s. It was all about them. Kind of the same thing happened in this movie.
Sure.
I don't know, and I should have looked this up. How well received was this when it came out in 83?
My understanding, it was sort of mixed reviews. It was successful financially. It cost 10 million and made 33 million, but I think it sort of was mixed. And I think a lot of the criticisms we're levying here about the style and the form of it is what they focused on.
Yeah, it just didn't fit. It felt a little too West Side Story on the stage, kind of.
For sure. I do think it, we talked about C. Thomas Howell's performance, and the more I'm sitting here thinking about it, he played the role in such a morose way that I wonder if the character had a little more spark, the movie would have worked better. Because we end up spending a lot of time with him and Ralph Macchio, and Ralph Macchio just plays it as a kid who's scared all the time, which, I mean, that's kind of what his character was, right? But I feel like you needed a more charismatic core to the movie to really draw you in, because you're getting, like we've talked about, you're getting that in all the secondary characters. Matt Dillon is magnetic, Swayze, Tom Cruise, Diane Lane is great in it. She's like the Spitfire, and so at the center is this C. Thomas Howell, just big eyes looking around, not giving us much emotionally. So I wonder if you had someone else in that role, it might have been a little bit more successful. But then again, I don't know how much more you can overcome.
I think you're right. I think they needed a River Phoenix, who was Chris in Stand By Me. He was the charismatic kid who had this, troubling background, but potentially promising future. And in this movie, C. Thomas Howell was more like, I don't know. I was going to say Gordy from Stand By Me, but Gordy's character was good too. I don't think there were bad characters in Stand By Me, so I can't pick one.
So this is an interesting comparison to me because it's obviously kind of around the same time period. It's Oregon versus Oklahoma and Stand By Me. But, you know, it's kids from the wrong side of the tracks, sort of dealing with some heavy stuff. And it's such a better story in both the script and in its presentation on screen. And it's crazy to think about. Rob Reiner directed Stand By Me. Take away The Godfathers. Rob Reiner is a better director than Francis Ford Coppola. When
I
you
agree.
really think about all the movies that Rob Reiner made in the 80s, nobody had I've argued this before. No one in the history of film has had a better run of movies than Rob Reiner in the 1980s, early 90s. I'm going to leave some out probably, but Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, Stand By Me, Misery,
which was incredible directing. The Princess Bride, right?
Princess Bride. Like these are consecutive movies this man made. No one had a better run than him, and it's incredible to me to say that think about this movie in Rob Reiner's hands. It would have been so much better.
Yeah, I'm watching Stand By Me. I feel like I'm in the 50s. I'm one of these kids. I know exactly what their life was like. I'm watching The Outsiders and I'm thinking, wait, is this really supposed to be the 60s? They kind of talk like old timey kids from the 30s. I'm confused by the different accents.
Yeah, that's a good point because I've read somebody else has said this. I'm not coming up with this, but you use the specific to get at general appeal. When you try to make something that's appealing to everyone or that tells everybody's experience, it ends up being kind of a nothing. But when you really focus on something specific, a specific experience, and make it unique to that, we can all recognize ourselves in it and relate to it. And I think that's where Stand By Me succeeds because it's very specific in what, you know, the characters are very specific. The situation, the way it's shot is very sharp and has a point of view. And so it's easy to get into the movie. And I felt like this movie, The Outsiders, was shot in sort of this bland, old-fashioned style, so it was hard to hook into it, and the characters lack some depth, so we don't connect to them. And so, I don't know, that's an interesting way to think about storytelling, I guess, to me.
One more question I had. So the theme of the movie is Gloria. Van Morrison singing it, right? But I think it's when he was with them. What is the deal with using this song over and over again? Yeah.
I don't remember hearing it over and over again, so I'm not sure what to say. I mean, there was a theme by Stevie Wonder that was like the official theme of the movie.
Yeah. This song played constantly in this movie. And I thought, why are they playing this song again? I don't understand.
I guess I just didn't notice it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to find the answer.
It was a big hit, maybe. Maybe they paid the fee to license it, so they said, let's play it.
Good enough. Good enough.
The Stevie Wonder song stunk. I will just say it.
It was so cheesy. It was after school special kind of.
Yeah. And like it's that latter day Stevie that, you know, it's like everything in the 70s was dynamite. And then he hit 1980 and he's like, all right, I'm done making the good stuff.
By the way, I just called to say I love you. Yes.
Yeah. Let's melt the cheese and pour it over the top. This is my career. So yeah, I feel like, yeah, again, the after school special, the artificiality of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just,
I don't know.
It just is disappointing. I don't know. We got to talk about the most famous line of this movie because I've heard
gold.
This line. Say what?
Stay gold.
Stay gold, pony boy. I've heard this so many times in my life as a meme or as just a reference. So it was good to finally understand the context of it. But even then, I feel like the movie didn't do a great job in the moment when he's reciting the poem and then connecting it to the hospital. I felt like I had to think back. What is this a reference to? Oh yeah, it's that poem he said. I don't know how else you do it to make it more effective, but I don't know.
I don't know. Don't use a flashback because when they used a flashback of the Curtis kids' family in the car the mom and dad getting killed by the train.
Oh yeah.
I was like, what the hell is that? It was so bizarre.
It's just a poorly done
I mean,
way of giving him characterization. You're trying to like figure out why he's messed up and where mom and dad went. Well, there you go. Here's 10 seconds that explains it.
honestly, I felt like I was watching Family Guy for a second, like it was a joke.
Yeah, because it's like they cut to it and then it's over. Yeah.
Yes.
I think that could have been just as easily explained with a couple of lines of dialogue. You know, between like Derry and Ponyboy or something.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think they made the connection with Stay Gold as well as they should have, as clear as they should have. It should have been like a more meaningful thread throughout the film. I don't know.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm perplexed. I'm perplexed because I'm like, oh man, this movie is idolized. I mean, it's like a cult favorite. And I've, for years been like, oh yeah, The Outsiders. It's a great film. And then I went back and watched it. And I'm like, oof, this needs some work.
Yeah. I almost think it could be remade and be an effective movie with a little bit better screenplay and more naturalistic directing, because I think that I could, it's set in this like rural town, and even some of the reviews of it say it doesn't feel like a real place. If you could figure out a way to capture the heat, the sense of like oppressive heat and sweat and hopelessness of this little town, and I think you could do that by just stripping away the artifice of this movie, you could remake this and have it be an effective film.
Yeah. Maybe
And
put some adults in it. We didn't see any adults, really, except for the
teachers.
people outside the burning church.
That's true. And it is told entirely from the point of view of the greasers. You don't get much of the soch, although I don't think you really need the soch point of view. We kind of know they're just little uber fascists, and that's fine.
But, yeah. That scene in the front seat of the car where the soch and the greaser become friends and they see eye to eye for like 3 minutes wasn't enough.
Yeah.
I guess Cherry kind of served that purpose too.
Yeah, because
still wasn't enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like this movie could have more effectively examined, and I think it's very relevant to our current world, but examined the conditions that make kids like this feel so like almost nihilistic, as if nothing matters because life is terrible. There is no future. I mean, I feel like you get that from these kids, that they're just getting by. And I feel
show us what led Dally down this path and why in the end the death of Johnny pushes him to die by suicide by cop. I mean, that's the most tragic part of the story, is like clearly from the beginning, he just doesn't give a shit about anything and anyone and what's going to happen to him in the end. He's like, well, that's it. I'm done. It's the end of the road for me. And like, I want to know more about, I know your parents died and I know your parents fight a lot and maybe your parents own a bar and stuff, but we need more of the backstory.
Yeah. I mean, because I think this movie is all backstory. The plot itself isn't that exciting. They get in a fight, somebody dies, they hide, then they get in another fight. That's the plot.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's where what you need to focus on. Then you need to focus on the whys, and you need to connect the material to the real world, because there is a huge group of American white men who feel like they have no future, and right or wrong, that's how they feel. And we're seeing violence everywhere. So maybe we examine that. I mean, it's not like there wasn't this sort of violence back then also, you know what I mean? I don't know. And I realize maybe they didn't want to make it an overtly political movie, but I don't think that is political. I think it's socioeconomic. I don't know, little soapbox moment here. Sorry, but I feel like it's not fair in criticism to reject something for what you want it to be. I get that, but I also want this to be something else.
Yeah. We want a remake. We want them to do it the right way.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of people you could picture now making this movie really effectively. So anyway, Hollywood, get on it. A moderately unpopular film podcast wants you to.
We have 12 listeners.
We have more than 12 listeners.
Um,
Not much more, but
so Carl Click, weigh in and let us know why we're wrong about The Outsiders. He did not appreciate our take on what was
Bandits.
the last one we did? Bandits.
Yeah.
Or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
It's
But
true.
we love all the feedback, for real. We love it. We love hearing this feedback. It's great. So leave it on our Facebook page. Or you
Yeah.
can text us.
We need to post more on there too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are we watching next week?
Well, we're going from something very serious to something very ridiculous.
I love it.
We are going to watch Demolition Man, starring Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, with some really fun cameos or smaller roles with Sandra Bullock, Benjamin Bratt, Dennis Leary. It's an absolutely insane and terrible movie that is so much fun to watch.
Okay. Do you like it, or do you just like watching it because it's bad? You probably don't tell
There's
me.
like it's like a Venn diagram. There's like
Okay.
a middle zone that makes it work. I mean, I'm right in the middle. I can recognize it sucks and is stupid and just way out there, but also it doesn't take itself seriously at all, which makes it a ton of fun. So
Oh, I love it. What's it rated? I'm looking up the rating. Can I watch this with my children? What do you think?
probably
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine.
it's like PG-13.
I think so. I can't find it.
I can't remember anything too bad in it, but I mean,
I have a 14-year-old now, so he can deal with it. It's all good.
yeah, 14. I think I was 14 when I saw it too. It's just good, dumb American fun.
All right. All right. Demolition Man next week. Sweet.
Angelica, let's end this on some sort of more happy note, since I mean we've been nailing this movie. I feel like we got to end it on something positive here.
I will tell you, after The Outsiders and Karate Kid, I really liked Ralph Macchio a lot. I had posters all over my wall. And then my two best friends brought a picture of my brother into my room, and they put it up against the poster on the wall. Twins. Tore it down. I wish I had a picture of my brother to show you right now.
I didn't want to say it, but I actually think you look a lot like Ralph Macchio when he was young.
Really?
Like in this movie, even. Like I can see it. Like if you said that's my sister, or he's my brother, I would be like, yeah, I could see that.
It's funny. My brother looked exactly like him at that age, and my brother as an adult looks exactly like Ralph Macchio as an adult. They've aged very similarly. They both appear to have broken their noses several times. And my youngest son looks a lot like Ralph Macchio in The Outsiders. Different color eyes, but the same face. And I'm like, oh, I had a crush on my brother. Yeah.
Film Swap is produced and hosted by Angelica Thornton and Nick Voll. You can watch or listen on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Follow Angelica on Twitter at Angelica KATU, and follow Nick at Nick Voll. Share your thoughts on the films we discussed there, and we might just read them on the show. Music by John Michael Farley and Nick Voll.